Good morning. My name is Jamie Waterfield, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for the second in a series of panel discussions brought to you by Apex Digital Solutions. Throughout the series, we're speaking with experts across managed security solutions, incident response and recovery, legal, and insurance on advice before, during, and after a security breach. All sessions are being recorded, so you can go back and watch any that you may have missed. Our host for today's panel discussion is Apex Digital Solutions founder and CEO, Jason Lambiris. We wish to welcome back and thank our panelists joining us today, who each bring a significant amount of experience in their respective fields of work. Sean Blankhorn, Senior Security Advisor to Apex Digital Solutions. Stephen Legg, co-founder and CEO of Antigen Security. Chris Martella, shareholder with Kemp Klein Law Firm. And Brian Pilarski, commercial insurance agent with Brown & Brown of Detroit. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to you, Jason.
So again, just want to welcome everybody back to the panel. Sean, Chris, Stephen, and Brian, appreciate your time as always and your expertise. So I'll get us kind of rapidly started here. I want to share a couple of quick statistics from 2020 around cyber attacks and breaches in general. First and foremost, in 2020, a cyber attack occurred every 39 seconds. And it's estimated that by the end of this year, that will increase to a cyber attack occurring every 11 seconds. The average time, which is very relevant to the discussion that we're having today, to identify a breach was 228 days. And the average time to contain that breach was 80 days. Very relevant to what's happened in the past year in the increase in remote work. 76% of organizations report that remote work will or have already significantly increased the time to both identify and contain a breach. So these are happening more frequently at a blistering pace and taking longer time because of the complexities to contain, let alone identify them. The average cost of a data breach in the United States was $8.64 million, which is more than double the worldwide average. And notably, breaches that can be contained or have a life cycle of under 200 days versus the average of 315 days for the entire life cycle of a breach cost on average $1 million less than those that take longer in duration. So again, just stresses the importance of preparedness, having a plan, knowing what to do and how to execute has a rippling effect. So let's get into it. I want to start out with Stephen. Stephen Legg. Stephen, there's a lot to cover, no shortage of ground here, but from your perspective, what are the critical must-dos, right, from the first realization that breach has occurred through the course of containment or remediation? Love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so we come at this from many angles, and so I'll come at it from a few different ones. It's an old adage and one that I love, and it's one that really applies to any decision making you're doing in the heat of an incident, whether it's a breach or not. Measure twice, cut once. Know what you're doing, know who should be doing it, know why they're doing it. And if you can't answer those questions and lanes are not established, then understand that you're going to struggle more because of that. This could impact you in any number of ways. It could mean, knowing not to shut down or destroy forensic evidence. In the case of compromised systems, knowing how to disconnect those systems from the network so that they can be safely contained and the threat can be contained without destroying that evidence. Knowing, or rather planning for recovery operations adequately. So knowing that you have a trusted, authoritative space that you're restoring into, and you're not reinfecting yourself or creating a situation where you're proliferating an attacker's effect on your environment or your systems or data. There's a number of different things that we can talk about inside of each one of those things, but again, kind of the core takeaway is be prepared, know who needs to do what when, and engage your resources as early as possible to validate those things and get everybody on the same page from a decision-making perspective.
Good. Appreciate that. So you'd mentioned engaging your resources. So from a maybe a protocol and order, right? There's a lot of parties that is at least our panelists here, right? You guys all know, get involved in this. I'm going to go to Chris next, right? Chris, any guidance from your perspective on kind of the dues, right, or the order in which you should engage all the parties that we've mentioned, and maybe a quick recap of who that is from last session.
Absolutely. We'll talk about pre first. We talked about this last week. From a standpoint of when a data breach occurs and when you're aware of it, getting your three groups of people involved. You have your internal people, IT management, your breach mitigation team, and going to your plan. But your plan should also include contacting your legal counsel if you have outside counsel or inside counsel, and your insurance person. Call your Brian. Call your insurance person, because they are going to have processes and procedures you must comply with in order to obtain coverage, as well as to help the mitigation process. And you internally, when a breach occurs, almost have to play traffic cop with all of these different people. So the identified person in your breach plan has to be her or him, the traffic cop, and help coordinate all of these different parties, the internal resources, the external resources such as legal and insurance. And then insurance will likely bring in a third party as well. And that is another group that has to be coordinated. But, kind of the one thing that everyone forgets during the breach, when it occurs, is the data retention policy. And I'm sure we're going to cover more of that. Everyone kind of nods their head at this. One of the big things that everyone forgets is that when an event occurs, again, it's too late to change your insurance coverage. It's too late to change how you're defending the walls. You now have to become not only a coordinator, but a data retention person. And that is an internal thing that you or your team or part of your breach plan, right from the get-go. You've had a breach, you have to have what in the legal world we call a litigation hold traditionally, where it's save everything. Get and identify your resources, identify your assets, identify the information quickly, and lock it down so that you can give it to all the parties that are necessary to analyze it and help you with the breach. So that's the very basic. And I'm sure, Brian, you're going to have a comment on this. Sean, you're going to have a comment on this, because both of you see it, on a regular basis after a breach, including Steve. You've already talked, so I'm going to you've already covered that issue. So I'll pass it back to you, Jason, for that one.
Yeah, sure. Why don't we just swing right around to Brian? Brian, you and I had chatted a little bit around this topic prior to this session too, right? You definitely had some thoughts to share from who gets notified, how you notify, and some advice that you've given your clients.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Thanks, Chris, for the segue, as always. The important thing is, what type of event or breach is happening. So, ransomware is getting a lot of attention. That is becoming the go-to type of event. I don't know if go-to is the right word, but that is becoming the most common event that's hitting companies. So if it is a ransomware attack, one of the calls after a Steve or a Sean would be to the insurance company. So part of last week's session was make sure you have the hotline, the phone number of your agent or agency, and or your insurance company's, 1-800, there's a breach event claim line. So it's common that these things happen on, holidays or weekends or late nights. So it might not be during course of business hours. Part of that breach response plan is to have that number in the right hands of the right people so they can make that call at 24/7 basis. I think two calls are happening. One is to a Steve to kind of get the situation under control, at least start to stop the infiltration and start figuring out what's happened. And then second, if there is insurance, get them involved. And as Chris said, they may bring in their additional team to help sort out what's happening and assist with it. They may have their own set of partners and panel providers that will help support their policyholders in an event of a breach or claim event or a ransomware event. Businesses also have a choice to use their own relationships. Typically, if possible, that's pieced out before an event happens. But during an event, if there are certain vendors and certain relationships that a business owner does hold dear and have worked with a long time, they are able to coordinate. They just need to let the insurance company know that they're going to do this and who's doing what. Earlier, as Steve said, the traffic cop and Chris said traffic cop. You got to make sure they're letting everybody know what's happening. Another thing to note too is the last piece is about 42% of United States businesses purchase some version of a cyber insurance policy. So it's more likely than not there is no cyber insurance at all in an event. So the phone call may not come to me or the insurance company because there may not be an insurance resource to assist in this type of event. And that's where I'll transition it back to you, Jason. That's where the rest of the panel here would have to support a business if there is not any insurance involved.
Appreciate that. And I know that, we were talking last session around the insurance, right? Just assuming that you have an insurance policy isn't good enough. Understanding if that's a good policy, what coverages it has in different scenarios and threats, right? That's all part of that important planning. You'd shared that a lot of times. I'm going to play a little bit off of you'd share that, hey, you're definitely going to get, your incident response group, right? Your IT people to start to remediate the issue, which, I think by nature, right? Anybody in an organization where this is happening, they're going to want to stop the bleeding. They're going to want to get the business operational. But we've also got to be cautious in that. That's where I want to go to Steven a little bit too, right? Around some of the do's, right? Because I think by nature, technical people tend to be fixers and doers and want to, as well as the executives in the organization, they care about getting operational again. So what advice would you give in kind of that do category to make sure that we're staying in the rails here and according to the plan?
So, I already mentioned kind of measuring twice, cutting once. On the technical side, what that comes down to is things like making sure your technology teams aren't restoring before your forensic teams have been able to collect that evidence and preserve it. It's not shutting systems down, not deleting, phishing emails, not generally destroying any evidence or clearing logs or things that could give us better visibility into, one, what the threat is and how big or widespread it is, but two, how impactful it might be and what methods and means were used to action it. All of those things, both from a remediation and containment perspective, play a role, right? So when you're talking about like ransomware, for example, if you get ransomed and your systems are still online, depending on the variant of ransomware, we may be able to pull the keys for that ransomware out of memory. We may be able to stop the ransomware from actually encrypting all of your data successfully and decrypt it without paying a ransom or having to deal with the criminals at all. So these kind of opportunities only exist if you have an order of operations that kind of does those things in that way, preserving evidence, containing but not shutting down or destructively restoring anything, and generally making sure that your incident response and forensics teams are involved in any kind of recovery decisions or changes to the system. And that could go even extend as far as making sure you've done, IT related functions like have you done a lights out blackout scenario? Do you know how to restore? Do you know how to go from nothing back to functional? Is your business continuity plan in place? Can those business objectives be supported and executed while forensic measures are being applied to compromised systems? These are all things that kind of come up, and a lot of people make a lot of assumptions about these things, but they're absolutely things you want to get right in the heat of the moment, because they can be very impactful, both from the perspective of an insurance carrier who's going to be looking for that evidence to validate that you've done the right things and that your claim is payable, right, and covered. But also from a legal perspective to make sure that, for example, in cases where PII or other data is involved or privacy concerns like this, that you're, for example, not having the wrong folks communicating out information about that event to affected parties, or at the wrong time, or without the right information included. And I'll let our other panelists kind of speak to those ends. But these are all things that the technology will affect if it's approached incorrectly.
So sticking to that plan, regardless of how well that may be flushed out. And I hear you saying, be methodical and intentional, not going rogue or cowboy, so to speak. So Sean, definitely interested to hear your thoughts on this piece, and the other do's right around containment of it, considerations for what might come down the road. I read an interesting stat earlier this week that 39% of the costs of a breach actually appear a year after the incident itself. So what can you share with us?
Yeah, and I want to highlight maybe a couple of things here. So echo a lot of what Stephen is saying around roles, responsibility. I'll go back for a second and talk about just based on my experience. Obviously, in these situations, they're hectic, right? There's a lot going on. There's concern. There's even fear. There's a lot of emotion caught up in these types of situations. And one of the most important things that I've learned over the years has been exactly what Stephen had talked about in terms of roles and responsibilities, but really, really specifically. And I'm a sports guy, as you can see over my shoulder. The reality is in these situations, you have to appoint a quarterback. You have to have that individual that has command of the situation. And we need to do those things in a calm and collected manner, as calm as humanly possible, even when things appear to be on fire, right? And that's a difficult role, but it's a really, really important role, because at the end of the day, we need to be doing things. I heard Jason, you kind of mentioned it, but things with intent. We need to make decisions and work with intent, and we need to. One of the techniques I learned. I spent some time at West Branch in a leadership conference, and one of the things that they taught, and what really resonated well, that ties back to me in a situation like incident response, is we were working with some FBI officials that deal with high stress incidents, but they talked about a tactical pause, and I think that really goes back to a tool that you can leverage in the heat of a moment when you're in the middle of a breach. And tactical pause is really simple. It's around frequently taking stopping all activity and reorienting yourself based on the information that you have. And this should happen frequently, right? So in the last conversation, we talked about the OODA loop, and the observe, orient, and decide, and then act. And that's an important aspect to everything that we do in cybersecurity. And that tactical pause, along, usually I would say coordinated by that quarterback that I'm talking about, is, we want to stop frequently, take inventory of what's happening, what do we know now, what has changed, and how do we make decisions going forward, and how do we do things with intent, so that we're doing all the right things, we're communicating the right way, we are escalating to the right people, as Stephen described, and so forth. The other one real quick comment that I would make too, this kind of goes back to preparation and maybe a little bit in Chris's court, but oftentimes what you want to do is you want to know which contracts you have that have breach notifications associated with it. It's common now to be written into partnership agreements and customer agreements, depending on the customer. And the clock starts when you are aware that a breach has already occurred, and a breach may have occurred with information that pertains to a particular customer or client or partner. So it's important to have those categorized or cataloged, I should say, and refer back to that, so what commitments you have legally and ethically to your partners and your customers.
Great, some great advice. Kind of playing off of two things there, right? You all have acknowledged that several parties end up getting into the mix. In certain scenarios, insurance provider may bring in their own team of people. Having been, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, haven't been involved in these scenarios when they've happened with customers. As you all said, there's a lot going on, right? And that command and control is important. Chris, you and I chatted a little bit about the importance of also documenting, right, those instructions and acknowledging that and where that may come into play. Interested to hear you kind of share those thoughts here today.
Yeah. So, when my very first intro into this was talking about data retention as being, in the beginning, make sure you have a data retention policy. And Stephen, you also touched on this too. Don't go whole hog and start restoring systems without letting the forensic people get involved. And that's part of data retention. But to your point, Jason, as the breach matures and as the investigation and remediation matures, so you have the middle and the end of this cycle. And not only does the retention play an important role at that point in time, how long you keep data, but also being cognizant of the information that is being distributed among the team. Again, I'm not saying withhold information. That's not where I'm going with this. But Sean, you astutely pointed out that you may have other legal obligations during the breach, in the middle and at the end, ongoing post-breach. Again, we always focus on the fire drill in front of us. We've had a breach. Oh my God, we've got to fix it. But as the fix is going on, as the patient is being treated, you now have the maturity cycle. And within the maturity cycle, so in the middle and the end, the other actionable thing is make sure you are discussing with your team, including legal, especially legal, how much information is supposed to be given out and what obligations you have to give certain information to certain people, whether they're on your team or outside of your team. It could be a third-party vendor. It could be a customer. It could be the customer's customer because you have PII or there's a breach and there's a breach notification rule. And again, once you've gotten through the identify the breach, the middle and the end of it is also working with your breach mitigation team, whether it's Brian's people through insurance and their subcontractors, but discussing with them what are your ongoing obligations. A year of LifeLock, for example, because you've had a breach of PII. So engaging, having your breach team now somewhat set its focus on what's going on next and documenting it and maintaining the documents. I cannot stress that enough. Having the plan and working the plan on document retention and tracking. We talk about it like a crime scene. Now, when you see a crime scene, everyone watches NCIS and all the shows, and you notice that when somebody goes on the crime scene, there's a traffic cop, using the same analogy, standing at the entrance to the house or the crime scene with a notepad that keeps track of everyone that's come in and out and what time. That kind of process and procedure needs to continue during the middle and the end, the kind of the tail end of the mitigation and the response plan, and working with, and I can't say enough, insurance and legal to coach and work with the technical people, the frontline people to say, hey, by the way, if you run into this issue or if this comes up, you need to let us know because it changes the responsibility from potentially a legal notification issue or a document management or case control and retention case. So that's kind of a convoluted answer to kind of the middle and the end issues that you run into and how your team needs to adjust, not just to, oh my God, let's fix the problem and get the ship, keep the ship from sinking. Now it's the ship's fixed, but now we got to go and check and make sure that all the doors are locked and there's no other leaks elsewhere on the ship, and notify, the people on the boat what's going on.
Stresses the importance of doing things with intent, right? In amidst the crisis, we've talked before about the potential impact from a reputation standpoint. And I know several of you, right, both here today and in previous conversations have shared being very cautious, right, around the communication. And if it's engaging in a PR firm or a communications coach, just the importance of that, right? So the right things are being articulated without conjecture or opinion. We look at what happened just a few days ago, right, with the Colonial Pipeline breach and the impact it's having whether it's real or not, on a gas shortage and the panic that it's creating in the increasing gas prices, right? It's a large example, but these same things happen to companies of smaller scale without a doubt. So let's move into the don'ts, right? We shared a handful of things that I think are great practical tips on the things to consider, right? All the things that you should be doing and should be considering and how you should be approaching this. Let's come back around. We had started out with Stephen. Stephen, your opinion, your experience, what you've seen, right? What are the critical don'ts? Don't do this. Don't assume that. What advice can you give to our viewers today?
So I hate to keep banging the same drum, but a lot of it comes down to what Chris was alluding to with the documentation that is often overlooked or misplaced or just not thought of in the heat of conversations. Do not fail to document communication and decisions that happen, because whether it's the insurance company, law enforcement, your legal counsel, whoever might be interested in it, things like your digital chain of custody for evidence that's collected, who's touching what, who's doing what, how they're deciding it and why, those things all quickly become a huge problem for you that gets multiplied by kind of every successive failure in those chain of decisions. So to echo Sean and Chris, who both kind of highlighted the importance of this, really be, and yourself, Jason, really be intentional and know why you're doing what you're doing. Don't fail to do that, because if you do, and even if you're not completely prepared for every outcome of every particular incident, if you're stopping to tactically pause, Sean, as you put it, and assess what you're doing, you're really going to get ahead of a lot of compound failures that can occur, whether they're technical or business in nature.
All right. Brian, let's go to you for a few thoughts on the don'ts and what you've seen and experienced and what the repercussions were.
Yeah, thank you. And then great points by the panel. I think the number one don't that I would put out there is don't try to handle it on your own. And a lot of times there's panic and emotion, as Sean mentioned. And there is this immediate, let's fix it now because there's a lot, the business is at stake. There's some people want to make the ransom payment. If there's a ransom involved, they want to go ahead and handle the Bitcoin and say it's Bitcoin or whatever crypto. But you shouldn't do that. There's OFAC has rules that have been where the United States government will not allow you to pay certain countries and certain people in there because of it's illegal. And also notifying customers, as Sean alluded to about in the agreements. You want to be very careful of how you say things, when you say them. You might have additional obligations that you may not be aware of. So the theme of don't do it on your own is kind of the theme of this panel, is work with your team, whether there's insurance involved or not. Oftentimes, Jason, you mentioned PR in that certain laws require that you have to disclose these data breach events or these incidents. Organizations do not want that from a reputational standpoint, but is required to protect the consumers that you have. So, during a breach event, as you mentioned, it actually takes longer than one would think. You would think it's like a light switch. We have a breach, the lights are off, so to speak, and then it's over and they're back on. That's not how it works. As you said, it takes up to 80 days on average to work through a breach event. Slowly your emails will come back online. Slowly maybe your voice over IP will come back online. Slowly you'll be able to get different data from backup if it's still available. The key is work with your employees. Is what they say and who they say what to could be a big deal. Sometimes there's very sensitive information for customers. It may not be in an agreement, but you got to be very careful on when and how you inform them. If an employee says, sorry, we're under a breach event, we can't talk right now, or I'm not getting any email, that can have serious implications, and that's still categorized as don't do it on your own. So, one of the things during is to perhaps an insurance company might bring in a PR firm. They might help you in case there's a microphone shoved in your face, or you get a phone call from a reporter or somebody or a customer inquiring about what's going on. I think it's very important that it's not handled on your own, that you consult with the attorney, you consult with a PR firm if there's one available, how to handle that the proper way. Yeah, that's probably my biggest advice is don't try to take it on your own. Don't try to just solve the immediate problem without having the bigger picture in play. And the only way to really understand the bigger picture is to work with your resource team on what you're required to do.
Oh, it's great advice, especially the piece around being cautious, right, in the communication and what can be discussed and what cannot be discussed. Chris had mentioned, not uncommon, right? The notices are going to get sent to your business partners around retaining information. Probably a good opportunity to remind them of their confidentiality obligations as well. So, Chris, what's on your don't list? And what have you seen people do that maybe you got a story or two to share with us?
Well, what's on my don't list? Well, thank you, Brian, for so well just teeing this one up for me. The big don't list is if a microphone gets shoved in your face or a vendor calls you, have a communication policy and make sure that everyone in the chain of command, everyone who's involved, understands the communication policy. As Jason said, when a breach happens, you're going to send, what we call, as I said, jokingly called litigation hold or document retention letters to some of your vendors, some of your clients, etc. That is a great lead-in to remind them of, hey, this is not to be spread out on the street. And two, if you get contacted, what the processes and procedures are for information transference and communication, a unified message. Reputational damage is easy to happen and hard to fix, as we all know. And I have seen it, I hate to say it, more times than I care to admit, and this goes across the life cycle of the breach, during, in the middle and post, to have a unified communication message that everyone gets. It is not out of the ordinary, nor is it inappropriate. A takeaway from this is, if a microphone gets shoved in your face or a client wants to know more information, to have a response as simple as, we do not discuss ongoing breach issues. We will have a uniform statement at the end of this. We will communicate as necessary. It is okay to say we don't have a response yet, because that is a lot better in the media and in your reputational side than saying the wrong thing. Well, yeah, so-and-so, or this is another ransomware attack, or we're working with my favorite, and because people think this is covered and they think this is okay to say, we're working with our insurance team on a resolution. Don't do that. Just those words should never be uttered to an outside entity. All you have to say is, we don't comment on an ongoing data breach. We're investigating this matter, or we don't make any comments during the investigation phase. That's it. You want to talk about my one war story? That's it. We've had, whether it's the third party vendor, whether it's somebody inside, their internal communications person, even the CEO. And as I hate to pick on the CEO, sometimes the camera gets thrust in their face and they feel obligated to respond, and they don't. Okay, they don't have to respond, because we're reviewing this and have no comment is an acceptable response than giving them a false impression, the wrong information, or too much information. All of that is damaging. And I'm sure Stephen will tell you, or Sean will tell you, during that breach procedure, sometimes the last thing you want is it out in the public, because that makes some people more aware. It makes the mitigation or the rectification harder to do. It also makes the investigation forensics part harder to do, because now you've got, your network's being bombarded by people asking questions, and you bring people in. So, my one takeaway, and Sean, thank you for teeing that up. I'm sorry, Brian, thank you for teeing that up so well, is communication and having that conversation in your mitigation plan about how you're going to communicate what's going on, whether it's with vendors, whether it's with third parties, whether it's with customers. Have a plan of attack on communication and work it with intention. Jason, you keep saying that. Being intentional in your communication, it's no different than being intentional in mitigating. It's just as much a management of expectation and reputation. because sometimes that's covered, sometimes it's not. And reputation, no matter how well it's covered by insurance, it's still reputation. The hardest thing to get and the easiest thing to lose. So be mindful of that and work that plan with intention. So thank you, Brian. Thank you very much for making that so easy for me.
Well, we've all highlighted, right, the importance of that, and definitely from the outside. But again, if a few of you guys have mentioned it's controlling that internal communication too. We all know that the grapevines are alive and well in most organizations out there, right? And just in casual conversations, somebody may inadvertently say something that they shouldn't be sharing. So key part. Sean, let's go to you. What's on your don't list for our audience?
Yeah. And just back to the communication thing, it's, as everyone has talked about, it's about being measured in terms of what you say. Don't say the wrong things. And so I always just go back to, training, when we've talked to auditors and people of that nature. I always learn the valuable lesson of less is more sometimes, right? And you want to say a lot of different things, but less is more, right? Give factual information and then move on. So don't be loose-lipped in that regard. But I think, I'm going to go back, knee-jerk reactions are very, very common in this scenario. Stephen talked about it in terms of ransomware, right? A knee-jerk reaction can lead to all sorts of things, right? Where we overwrite information that we might need, or we lose an opportunity to get ransom keys. So my big thing is to not have that knee-jerk reaction, right? And you again, everyone has said it. You often want to jump in and take action and fix things, but ransomware is only one example. I think for all of us, we've probably been in experience of other situations outside of ransomware, and you have to be cautious, right? I've been involved in scenarios where we were concerned whether or not the malware had some sort of time bomb, or the attackers had some sort of time bomb in there. So if we cut off their access, for example, does that trigger some sort of nuclear event, so to speak, that then destroys devices, machines, data, and so forth? So we want to be cautious of that. In another scenario, there was a Midwest law firm that I was working with in the past that had been breached by the Chinese. It was a law firm that was embattled in a very high-profile court case. This has been on the news, so it's public domain. But one of the things that we didn't know at that time, when that breach was in process, was we did not know still at that point how the attackers had gained access to the systems of the law firm, right? So the knee-jerk reaction was to want to unplug, just pull the plug on the internet, cut them off, and move forward. But the reality is what we needed to do was actually understand were they gaining access, what did they have access to in our environment, and so letting them continue and then actually just watching them, almost like a little bit of a cat and mouse game, was important for us to ultimately identify how did they get in. And then we can start taking that mitigation effort of removing their access, getting them out of the systems, and shutting down the doors that let them in the first place. So the big thing on my list is that do not have that knee-jerk reaction of just starting to pull the plugs or things of that nature.
Got it. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to circle back around real quick. 20, 30 seconds closing thoughts. Again, do's, don'ts, or items that we didn't touch on during the course of containing and remediating a breach. Stephen, let's go to you first.
Yeah, so I heard conversations about communication plans kind of throughout today's panel. And so that's the one do I want to leave everyone with. When it comes to communication planning, the plan is as important as how you're going to execute it. And a lot of people don't think about having an out-of-band communication system. And this is especially important in cases of business email compromise, but can really apply to any type of event. It's very critical to know what phone you're going to call, and who you're going to call, and what systems are going to be used to maintain that communication over the course of an incident or breach, because that often will directly affect how quickly and effectively you respond.
Great tip. Brian, closing thoughts.
Yeah, I would think don't underplay or undermine or try to dismiss or minimize the importance of a potential breach. I think a lot of times symptoms occur and people don't think there's going to be a really big exposure. There might be phishing emails coming through, or there might be other signs of something going on, or even a smaller breach event, denial of service, or some type of weird incidents going on. Is don't ignore that symptom and really work with your team proactively. So proactive and prevention really is the best medicine in these scenarios.
Mr. Martella.
Mine is don't get target focused. Watch out for the second wave. When you go through a breach, what I have seen happen and what I'm seeing in more and more cases is you identify a breach and everyone's focus turns to the breach in front of them. And sometimes that takes all the troops off the back door, or they're not prepared for a second wave. And it might not be an intentional second wave. It just is in the course of everyday world as we know it, another attack is going to happen. And people unfortunately get so focused on and being intentional on solving the breach that's in front of them, because as we talked about, a lot of people on this call, they're doers. They're let's get it fixed. Make sure your traffic cop, she or he, hasn't turned all of their focus on the one breach that's occurring at the moment, and keep that eyes in the back of your head mentality that another breach could be happening, whether it's part of this first breach, whether it's wholly unassociated with it. Because we know it is so common, and I have seen it happen, we're working through breach number one and an unrelated breach at another location or the same location happens, and people forget, or it just goes unnoticed and they realize that it's just snowballed out of control. And now they've got two wars to fight and not just one. So mine is always focus on the breach, don't get me wrong, but keep the procedures in place and keep the vigilance, because number 2, 3, and 4 could be happening while number 1 is being, while you're fighting the first battle.
Great advice all around. Well, I believe we're at time for today. As we always know, no shortage of content or topics to get into. So, Sean, Chris, Stephen, and Brian, want to thank you again. Thank our audience out there. Hopefully, we were able to answer some of the questions you submitted prior to along the way. Definitely remember to join us next week for part 3, where we get into a little bit more of the aftermath, so to speak. Appreciate your time today. Look forward to next week as well. Take care. Thank you, everyone.